Hey everybody, thank you for joining me in session 165 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. In this episode, I speak with Brett Yarris, founder of The Behavior Movement and co-founder of Pro Football Network. I first heard about Brett when he was featured on the Controversial Exchange podcast with Ryan and Dimitri. And in that episode, I recall how passionately Brett advocated for a wider application of our science. And in this regard, he is really leading by example. In this episode, we discussed how he found his way into applied behavior analysis, how his frustration with the status quo led him to start his own company, how he got into coaching elite-level football players, and how he broke into the crowded and noisy field known as NFL sports media. In addition to these topics, I think the two most interesting segments of this show came from his discussion of how he devotes a significant amount of consultation and training time to helping individuals with developmental disabilities improve their physical health. And the second thing I think is really interesting is that we got into this discussion about the relevance, or perhaps in some cases the irrelevance, of the Behavior Analysis Certification Board. That part comes towards the end, so you're going to want to listen to the whole thing through. But I'll just say that there are some strong opinions offered, and it's a fun discussion. So it's a fun discussion regardless of where you come down on the issue, certainly. Me being sort of a bored lifer, I kind of put my biases out there. But my thoughts notwithstanding, I think Brett's are interesting, whether, again, you agree with them or not. So lastly, for Patreon subscribers only, we have a members-only kind of bonus segment at the end. So Brett, he's a football analyst. That's part of what he does. And he hangs out a little while longer and answers some questions about the upcoming NFL season. In particular, we discuss the 2021 prospects of my son's favorite team, the LA Chargers. And then, of course, my favorite team, the New England Patriots. I know, most of you are booing. We talk about my other son's fantasy football prospects, and we get into just kind of a discussion about the field or the sport in general, what things we can look forward to this year. And we end with Brett's prediction for the Super Bowl. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can go to patreon.com/behavioral observations. As always, we have all the references and links to the things we talked about in the show notes over at behavioralobservations.com. And we are brought to you by the ABA Marketing Minute from Rich Brooks at Flight New Media. If you're wondering how to successfully market your ABA practice, go to takeflight.com/ABA Minute and check out Flight New Media's free 35-minute lesson on building effective websites. We're also brought to you by the Professional Crisis Management Association, or PCMA for short. Later on the show, you'll hear from one of the most popular guests on our podcast, Dr. Merrill Winston, where he'll talk about how PCMA helps agencies support individuals who exhibit dangerous behaviors. So for more information on them, go to pcma.com. And then we're brought to you by the 2021 New Hampshire ABA Conference. If you're in New England on September 11th, take the short drive to beautiful Concord, New Hampshire to attend this year's event. And if you're not local to the region, don't worry, the event is available virtually as well. This year's program features both clinical and business tracks. It features a free lunch and an afternoon ice cream social. How about that? And there's great talks too, including keynotes from Drs. Kelsey Ruppel and Antonio Harrison, Paulie Gavoni, Byron Wine, Peter Gerhardt, Brett Denovi, and more. They'll all be there as well. So for more information, go to nhaba.net and click the conference tab for more details. And while you're at it, use the promo code MAT2021 to save at checkout. And lastly, I want to give thanks to our institutional tier patron, Green Space Behavioral Technology. Green Space Behavior offers cutting-edge supervisor coaching, performance and competency-based trainings, and organizational supports for new BCBAs and trainees. Find out how you can optimize your supervision practices, improve clinical outcomes, and increase employee satisfaction over at greenspacebehavior.com. All right, that is it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get to this fun conversation with Brett Yarris.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Brett Yarris, thanks for joining me on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. We're meeting somewhat early in the morning here because we both have other things to do today. So I appreciate you scheduling this interview so early. We've got a lot of things to talk about. I've been wanting to talk to you ever since I heard you on the Controversial Exchange with Ryan and company. I just thought that was a really fun conversation. And the moment I heard it, I was like, I have to talk to this guy because he's doing some really interesting things. So I know it's taken a little while to get from point A to point B, but I'm glad we're here. And so again, thanks for joining me today. So Brett, what I'd like to do is start like we always do here on the show. And I'd like to hear how you discovered behavior analysis and what made you really want to do it as a career.
Yeah, my story and journey to and through behavior analysis has been a weird one with lots of twists and turns in it. But I guess it all started when I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree. I had never heard of behavior analysis at that point. I had never understood special education or even really understood autism. But what I did know is I wanted to coach football. And so I requested and applied for a football coaching job in a Westchester County, New York school district. And they were like, look, you can't just coach football here. You got to do something else. And the other thing we have for you is a one-to-one aid position for a child with autism in our self-contained class. And I was like, so all I got to do is follow this kid around and then I get to go coach football. This is going to be easy. It was not easy. He was my size in middle school, and for those listening, I'm a little over 6 feet tall, weigh about 245 pounds. And he had a lot of aggressive behaviors, a lot of self-injurious behaviors, and some other things that I had never experienced before in my life. And about 3 weeks in, I was going to quit. Honestly, I was going to go into sales, or I had a job interview at ESPN. Like, this just was not for me. And my uncle, my godfather, who's actually my business partner in the behavior movement, his name's Glenn. He convinced me to stay. He was like, look, he's a business person. He was been chasing the dollar his entire life. And he said to me, he's like, dude, you're 21, 22 years old. You have an opportunity to make a difference here. You need to stick this out. The dollars will be there. The money will be there. But you need to stick this out. And so I stayed, and there was a BCBA who was contracted by the school district to come into our classroom. And she kind of just took an interest in how quickly I was picking up some of the programmatic things that she was putting in there. And so she would just keep dropping little ABA bombs, on me during the day. And I was like, man, this is really fascinating, because what I started to see was that a lot of what we were doing, if we stayed to it, if we were consistent, was having a really positive effect. And I was fascinated by having that type of impact and ability, not necessarily, certainly in the ability to positively change someone's life, but that we as humans and living things operated in these really interesting ways that we could observe and shape for the better and do all these things. And so I decided, I wanted to go through with this, and my easiest pathway there, I went and got a master's degree in special education. And then I went on to do the coursework through Florida Institute of Technology with Dr. Martinez Diaz, RIP to him, obviously. And and then from there, it just evolved to where I am now. But I would say, that's going back now 12, 13 years.
Can I ask you a question about that first experience? Was there a moment working with that student where you were applying some technique or implementing some type of intervention that it all kind of gelled together? Was there kind of like an aha moment, or was there, what made that? What made the implementation of whatever ABA interventions that you use with that student impactful to you, such that you were like, cool, this is what I want to do?
I think it was me watching the BCBA at the time go through the functional analysis piece. And she was Carbone trained, by the way. So she had a very unique, I don't know if very unique, but she had a different style, I guess, as I've come to see throughout my experience. But we were doing an intervention for his his object throwing behavior. That was his go-to in certain circumstances. And the moment it clicked was when she told me that it was attention seeking. It was there was a reason, there was a function for the behavior beyond just being destructive, right? A lot of people would look at him and say he's a destructive kid. He just likes to destroy things. But it was deeper than that. And she helped me find that depth. And I think that was when I was like, wow. Because once we started, I'm sure a lot of your listeners understand this. Once we started treating it that way, then we started to see the differences. And that's when it was like, wow, this is crazy. Like when you can understand the function of it with the purpose that the behavior, that the response is serving, that's when you can really make those differences and make those changes. And that's not something I'd experienced until that moment. And that's when it was like, I want to do this. I want to figure this out.
All right, cool. Thanks for elaborating on that. So I interrupted your kind of career arc there. And so you got your master's degree, you did the coursework at FIT. I presume you took the exam at some point. And so what was your first work experience in the field once you were a BCBA?
So, well, here's the kicker here is I'm actually not a BCBA.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So this is this was a big topic of discussion when I was with Ryan and Dimitri, and when I was doing.
All right. It's coming back to me. I apologize. So I want to.
No, you're good.
So let's put a pin in that for a second, okay? Because I think that's a huge thing that I want to get into as a standalone topic. But I want to.
There's a reason. There is.
Yeah.
There is a reason.
I absolutely want to get into that. But I want the listeners to have some further context about who you are and what you do before we delve into that kettle of fish, as it were. So what were I guess post grad school? What did you do with what you've learned, certification notwithstanding?
Yeah. So what I ended up doing after grad school was I actually ended up becoming the teacher in that self-contained class that I was the 1-to-1 aide in. And so I was there. I did end up continuing to coach football. So football remained a very large part of my life. In fact, while I was doing that, I was actually getting exposure to a lot of different things going on inside of the pro football world. I was interning with former pro coaches, getting exposed to pro players, agents, all that stuff. And then after I was a teacher in that room for about 3 or 4 years, I ended up going to what's called a state-approved a state-approved private school to be a teacher and behavior consultant. And this was in the state of Connecticut now. Mm-hmm. And so I was there for a couple of years. And then I was so fed up with the public school system, at least in New York / Connecticut. And I don't want to say the private school system, but the state approved private school process, which is essentially just an extension of the public school system in the state of Connecticut, especially as it related to doing meaningful things and using science-based techniques and methods for teaching kids with special needs. And really that impacted me in the realm of physical education. Because the way I looked at it, for a lot of our kids who are severely impacted by their disabilities, physical education is like the main thing that is going to stick with them through their 40s and 50s. You can really help them have an active and healthy lifestyle if you take a really focused approach to it. And that wasn't happening in any of the places I had been, any of the places I observed. In a lot of cases, physical education was an afterthought. In the public schools, you pay the gen ed phys ed teacher a stipend, and he's not trained to work with a lot of behaviors. He's also not really trained to teach that population of student. And so you get 45 minutes to an hour of walking laps around the gym, 18-year-olds riding tricycles, just things that were never going to be meaningful to them in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, their adult years of life. And the challenging part of that for me is the more I was learning, the more I was realizing that population is especially susceptible to chronic illness like diabetes and depression and obesity, things that result from sedentary lifestyles, which we know this population has a tendency to be. And so I was like, man, we can be doing this so much better. And yet every time I tried to make improvements in the places I was met with resistance, too much work, too much time, too much resources. And that's the worst thing you could tell somebody like me is that it takes too much, because I hear, okay, well, there's a major pain point there and I need to provide a solution. And as we'll get into the certification conversation later on, I'm not one that I don't work well in a box. Right. Like I don't do well when you try to box me in. And so I was like, F it, I'm gonna start my own thing. And that's how the behavior movement was born. And it really became very quickly a active living education company for individuals with special needs, focused with utilizing applied behavior analysis and the science of behavior.
And around what time did you? So the behavior movement is the company you founded.
That's correct.
And about what year did you get that rolling?
So that was 2016.
Okay, and that's bxmovement.com.
That is, yeah. Although I will caution your listeners, the website now is horrendous. It was really just an informational website, so when people come, they could call me because it started out as a very localized company. But through my continued work and partnership with Ryan O'Donnell, it will eventually become a content site in addition to information. So we'll be posting articles and videos and audio of different topics around healthy living, active living for individuals with special needs, plus the professional athletes that I work with through the behavior movement as well.
Hi, I'm Dr. Merrill Winston. How many times has this happened to you? There's a crisis where you're consulting and the individual is damaging people and the environment, and you ask, what's your policy for going hands-on here? And one staff member says, well, I don't lay a hand on him until he's a danger to self or others. Another staff member says, you do what? I only go hands-on when he puts hands on me. You then ask, well, when do you think he's actually going to be a danger to self or others? And they both say, probably pretty soon. Just then an administrator shows up and says, why hasn't this room been cleared? I don't want anyone restraining anybody. Are you tired of subjective criteria that create inconsistent environments for your clients and students? Well, this is just one area where PCMA accomplishes what others don't even realize they're lacking, which is a clear behavioral criteria for the appropriate use of restraint, including examples and non-examples. This is why the average PCMA organization reports a 60% reduction in the use of crisis intervention procedures and crisis-related injuries. Turns out it does matter if your system is based on the science of applied behavior analysis. Go to PCMA.com to see why it's in the best interest of your organization to switch to a behavioral crisis intervention system.
I see. So it seems like there are, I visited the website, and so it looks like there's like two main service branches in terms of like the coaching of, I guess, elite level athletes, and then certainly providing these in the more basic instruction of physical leisure skills to individuals with developmental disabilities. Do I have that right, or is there something I missed?
No, I mean, in theory, for our purposes, right? You and I, and I'm sure a majority of your listeners, it's really not different in the sense of how we're delivering the service, right? What's different is the population class and the goals. So the name, the behavior movement is really like a double entendre. There's a depth to it, right? So on the one hand, we're working with individuals with disabilities who may have challenging behaviors that make it difficult for them to access healthy living and an active lifestyle. But even within that, beyond the challenging behaviors they may exhibit, it's their movement patterns that also need a lot of work. And that's the main thing that we do, is we look at movement as behavior, because it is behavior. And so we treat movement behaviors as things that can be shaped and chained together to create effective and functional movement patterns. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of the crossover with the professional athlete, because what they need to do on the field is all based in movement. So they may not have those challenging behaviors, but their goals in terms of moving in a way that allows them to access their best possible physical selves, that's the same across both populations.
And would you say movement patterns, are you talking about like basic push-pull, hinge, squat type of movement patterns that you hear about in like functional fitness? Or are you talking about just more general, like being active, learning how to ride a bike, et cetera, et cetera?
I think you have to have a good understanding and use of the former before you can even do the latter. I think a lot of people struggle with those basic leisure skills and rec skills because they're not proficient or even at a base level of those push-pull hinge based movements. Now, what I am certified in is functional movement systems. I am a certified functional movement specialist. And so understanding that and really being able to apply it to those guys, so one of our guys, what we try to do is build a base level of understanding through everything from things like yoga poses, where we're doing core balance and stability, and then we're applying that to what we call foundational movements. So that's movement patterns that take place in one specific location. So you're thinking of things like planks and bridges and supine poses and things of that sort. And then those evolve into your functional movements or anything that takes your body from point A to point B. So that could be something as basic as a push-up. And even though you're not moving location with a push-up, your body is going up to down and back up. So anything that involves joint movement becomes a functional movement. And so we're shaping those core poses into the movements themselves. And then those movements lend themselves to rec and leisure skills and sports skills and all those other things. So it's just a sequential movement through that type of curriculum, if you want to call it, that we work through.
I see. So I'm fascinated by this. So what I'd like to do is for you to take me through perhaps a abbreviated intake process. So let's say I'm a parent and I've got a 13-year-old child with some form of developmental disability, and I'm concerned about his physical development, lack of or sedentary I guess lifestyle, et cetera, and I come to you guys. What does the process look like, I guess, is where I'm leading.
Yeah. So the first thing is it's almost like an interview kind of thing. Sometimes the parents come in by themselves for the first time because they have history of bringing their kids to these types of things and it being difficult for them to deal with.
Right.
But I always encourage them to bring their student so that they can get used to me or my staff or the facility that we have. But it begins really as a basic interview process. Like, I want to understand what are your child's historical challenging behaviors? Where do they occur typically? What are they like in school as opposed to home? All of those types of things. And then really the next phase is just letting the students sort of just explore and see where they go to in the facility. Where are they drawn to naturally? What catches their eye? What are some things that pull them to a certain area? Usually it's the machines, or sometimes it's the cables, or sometimes it's the whatever. Then just make note of all that. And then from a physical perspective, that first session is all about that testing. They actually go through a functional movement test that I modify based on need, depending on what the physical abilities are. And then from there, once I have that understanding of where they are with, the 7 basic movement patterns, functional movement patterns, everything from a deep squat to a supine, push up and different things. And then once I have that, then we start working the curriculum. We start in that foundational phase where we're, really trying to recreate the history, if you will, of movement development from baby, infant to adult, right? When you think of a baby, right? And for those of you who have kids, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't, take some notes right now, because it's
coming your way.
This is the thing. But when you first have your newborn, the doctors, the hospital, they tell you, you need to put them on their back, right? When you put them down to bed, you need to put them down on their back. It used to be stomach, but it's shifted, right? Put them on their back. And so now the first, and for years now, decades now, the first time you're moving as a person, as a human, is from that supine position on your back. And then we work through that very first movement milestone for humans, which is rolling over, right? That's a huge thing. So how do we roll over? There's a lot of things that go into that. You got to pull that shoulder back. You got to get your hips over, all that stuff. And that puts you in the prone position. So we start working some movements from the prone position. The very next movement milestone is you get onto all fours, that quadruped position. You learn to crawl. So we start working movements from there. And then from there, you get into your biped. That's when you're standing up, and really just working our way back through there and finding, if you will, where in those positions the pain points have been, where has been the maldevelopment, where can we make some significant changes, and then make it easier as we shape those things to access greater movement challenges that come down the road.
Today I'm going to share with you how to turn website visitors into clients. My name is Rich Brooks, and I've been helping therapists and businesses succeed online since 1997. When writing your website copy, you should write as if you're talking to one person at a time. Explain your process. How will you help them? What do they need to do to prepare? What does a typical in-home visit look like? What should they expect if they're visiting your center-based practice for the first time? We, as a species, are risk-averse. The more you can do to build trust through words, images, and video, the more likely a parent in need will reach out. And to that end, make sure you end each page with a clear call to action, the next step someone should take. Pick up the phone, fill out a contact form, get on a waiting list. Be the caring guide they need you to be. I couldn't include everything I wanted to share in just 1 minute, so for more advice on websites at work, visit takeflight.com/ABA Minute.
Okay, so I'm picturing this in my mind, and so I guess one question I have as I'm kind of trying to picture this in my mind is, you're asking individuals to do these effortful things. So I'm curious in terms of how you guys approach the whole motivation and reinforcement angle of this. If you're asking clients to perform these movements that are very likely effortful for them because of either a lack of development or practice or what have you. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, everyone's different. So there's no one size fits all where I have this, secret reinforcement schedule that I use for everybody. I try to understand initially, and that's why that first interview really comes in to play here, where I see what in the building the students are naturally drawn to as I'm talking to their mom or dad, and they're walking around and they're touching things, feeling things, and taking things out and so on. So there's a level of tangible reinforcement. Sometimes they come in with things that, they have this attraction to or attachment to that I can use as a reinforcer, right? So my time, your time, right? My time, you're giving me 5 minutes of effortful work for 1 to 2 minutes of your time with whatever that object is. And, we'll shape that down. I never leave it as is. My goal is always try to get through with no breaks, no reinforcement periods. And we sometimes get there. We get through an hour where I'm not needing to give breaks because we've shaped some of that stuff out, second by second if we have to. But then there's also a natural negative reinforcement at play here. When you're putting your body through physical strain and stress, the ending of that exercise, the ending of that work period serves as a reinforcer, right? Because you're removing that the moment that you're you come out of the plank, or the moment you're done with your last push-up, or the last minute of the treadmill program. And so the physical stress on your body instantly goes away the moment that's done. And so there's a bit of natural reinforcement there. If I get to point X in this program, I'll have a natural relief. And so I'm kind of playing on both of those things. In the relief period, I'm also providing sometimes a tangible object, but my hope is that I can shape away the need for the tangible object and just rely on the relief period at the ending of a program. And so, and like I said, each student is different. Sometimes it's a 50-50 split, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And then my hope is to get it to where we're doing 10 minutes straight with no break, or however that works. So that's the main thing. And then there are some kids who I know you and your listeners have experienced, where there is no reinforcer, or no obvious reinforcer, I should say. And you're trying to really work your way through and find out what that is. Sometimes the only thing that's reinforcing is the relief, and it's hard to work with that if they find a way to provide the relief themselves without you, or without the boundaries that you've set. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, you have to, understand, how are you going to make those boundaries contingent? What can you make them contingent on, so that they have meaning and purpose in the course of what it is you're trying to do? So it's hard. It's why public schools don't do it, because it takes time, money, and resources to find people willing to figure this out, and understand that you're not going to do it in the first session, the second session, or the third session. And that's the number one thing I talk to parents about. I say, guys, if you're coming here because you think this is like a magic trick, or you think that I'll be able to do something that none of your previous experiences have been able to do, and I'll be able to do it in 24 hours, that's not how this works. It's a consistent process that requires dedication and consistency to the process itself.
Brett, from a business perspective, what has been the response to providing this service into the, marketplace? And if you can, in your answer, kind of talk about also are you still in Connecticut, or are you in New York? So I'm sure that plays a role in terms of available clientele, et cetera, too.
Yeah. So thank you for that. It's a good question. So I'll answer the last part first. So we're in New York, but we're right on the border of Westchester County, New York, and Fairfield County, Connecticut. So that's the southeastern part of New York and the southwestern part of Connecticut. But we also have clients all over the country and the world. We have a couple in the UK that we work remotely with, which is a whole other set of challenges. You're really working with the parents and you're doing a lot of parent training in that role. But yeah, so we have clients all over who we can work remotely with, but then our physical clients and clients that we are going to base a lot of content around and training around for those remote clients and everything else is in that Westchester County, Fairfield County, New York, Connecticut area. And in answering that, I've completely lost track of the first half of that question.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. So if, I'm willing to bet there's someone listening to this who is entrepreneurial minded like you are and has an interest in sports and fitness, et cetera, and might be wondering to themselves, what sort of marketplace exists for this type of service. And so I'm not asking you to divulge numbers or anything like that, but I'm just curious what is the marketplace sufficient to sustain a business, if you will, serving just this population, doing interventions as you've described?
Yeah, 100%. So, and we'll talk, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I obviously also work with NFL players and pro athletes, and one might assume that that's the main revenue source for the business, and everything else kind of falls in line there. But really, they only make up 12% of my revenue.
Okay.
So you're looking at 88% is individuals with developmental disabilities, and the good thing is there's not a ton of overhead, And if you work it, and this is, for those who are trained in organizational behavior management, this is something that there's a lot of OBM techniques that can be utilized to make you a cash flow positive business from the get-go, right? If you keep your overhead low, and if you need staff, which, I didn't need staff for a while till my time got maxed out. So I was able to really make a significant profit early on, net profit. And then, once I needed staff, it was figuring out how can we maintain that profit level, right? So entered into a profit share with my staff. So if we charge X for a client per hour, when they come in and a staff member is going to be the main service provider, they get paid an hourly share, but they get paid a profit share bonus, and they stay motivated. They want to keep coming and doing the work. And we always maintain that profit line. So I established the baseline with my own. I take a salary, a set salary. So I'm not taking 100% of every fee that comes in per client. So there's your profit line there. And you kind of just are looking ways to maintain that. But yeah, man, my life changed when I did this, and I'm not, again, this is not a get rich quick kind of thing, or something where I have a course where I'm teaching people to do real estate, right? This is
selling timeshares.
Yeah, this is not that. I'm always happy to talk to people about my experience. Between the time I did Ryan's podcast, and really Antonio Harrison was the first person who interviewed me, and then Ryan found me from there, and then I've done got to be like a dozen interviews since. So I'm always happy to talk about this, but it changed my life because I grew up, single mom, borderline welfare, on Long Island in New York, really struggled. I met my wife who did not come from that type of struggle that I did. And so there was always a bit of pressure on me to make it work. And so when I told her my first job out of college was as a one-to-one aide, was not on the right track to making it work. Now, bless her, man, because she didn't care. She's very supportive and whatever. But I think I've always been driven, just examining my own behavior. I've always been driven by not wanting to maintain that class level that I was at. And as terrible as that sounds, it's honest. And believe it or not, this actually provided me so much freedom, even beyond financial. It provided me family freedom, time freedom. And I was finally, for the first time, doing something that I loved and had a level of control over. If it was going to fail, it was going to be because I did something that made it fail. And if it was going to succeed, it was because I did something that made it succeed. When I was working in the schools, I had the opposite feeling. I walked in, I felt like I was handed a script. And if I deviated from the script, I was doing it wrong. No one wanted to hear ideas. Everyone just wanted to do what had always been done. And that just wasn't my thing. And so the financial has been great. It's not like I'm a billionaire, right? I'm not chilling on a yacht every single weekend. But beyond that, just the freedom it's given me as a creator, as a scientist, as a family person, that's been the biggest benefit. And I challenge anyone who's even thinking about doing this to do it. Because none of that happened until I jumped in with 2 feet.
Hey everyone, this is the last commercial break of this podcast. And in this particular break, I want to draw your attention to the New Hampshire ABA Conference that's coming up right around the corner on September 11th. It's taking place in beautiful Concord, New Hampshire, just a short drive from Massachusetts and other nearby areas in New England. So if you are local to this region, consider joining us for a full day of behavior analysis. Brett was just talking about starting a business and things like that. There's a business track with business people, actual business people like CPAs and lawyers and things like that, if I'm not mistaken. People know way more about this stuff than most of us. And there's a clinical track, and we will have keynotes from previous podcast guests, Drs. Kelsey Rupel and Antonio Harrison, and there'll be a lot of really good talks in between those two keynotes. Lunch is included, as well as an ice cream social. It'll be a great day of behavior analysis. If you're not local to the region, don't worry about it. You can attend online as well. There's a virtual option for the event too. So just go to newhampshireaba.net. That's nhaba.net. And click on the conference tab for more details. And if you do decide to go, use the offer code MAT2021 and save on your registration. And if you want to, you can just go to behavioralobservations.com and look at the show notes for this episode, and you'll have all the links right there waiting for you. I hope to see you there. All right, let's get back to this conversation with Brett. So what I'd like to do, so we talked about what it's like for an individual getting services, in the kind of DD realm. Talk to me about what would be the flow, if you will, of events if I'm or I'll put it more realistically. Let's say one of my kids is, developing a talent in some sort of athletic pursuit at the high school level in sports, or maybe, pursuing some, collegiate opportunity or something like that. And they want to kind of take their performance to the next level. How does the, behavior movement intervene and help individuals on that side of the service ledger, if you will, and the 12% of your pie chart of service activity?
Yeah. So, the reason that it's such a, excuse me, my dog is not being super cooperative right now. Yeah. So number one, the reason why that number is relatively small is because I'm super selective, right? Which is good and bad, but it's, I always have to remind myself, especially with what I'm doing now with Pro Football Network and how successful some of my NFL clients have become. I have to remind myself that I didn't start this for them. That can be very tempting when you're working with pro athletes and you get to go on the field before games and you're talking with NFL coaches and ESPN's doing profile write-ups of you. You can lose sight of the fact that that's not why the behavior movement started. It started because of the DD community. That's who it was meant to service. I happened to find along the way that it works for, I can service athletes as well, the elite athletes. So I'm very selective. The people I work with on that side have to be fully dedicated. They have to really be working towards going pro or going to, college or whatever the case is. What I won't do is work with like a middle school student, where I won't work with a football player whose dad thinks he's going to be the next Joe Montana or Tom Brady. But the kid hates football and would rather be playing Call of Duty, right? Like that's not what I'm trying to do. And I would say that's probably a big chunk of that side of the field, right? But to answer your question,
can I just pause you right there for a second? I'm going to make an assumption and I want to see if it's correct. So you could probably bill for days for people in that category, right? And you're making a conscious decision to kind of leave that pot of gold alone to pursue something more meaningful. Is that kind of where, I don't mean to kind of put words in your mouth, but I would imagine it's particularly in that neck of the woods, there's probably a lot of pressure, for people with their kids who, I just got to laugh because I seen some of that myself of like parents putting a ton of pressure on their kids, the kids not super into it, et cetera, or parents having an overinflated perspective on the developmental trajectory of their student athlete.
Yeah, Matt, if I took every kid that came my way who fit that profile, I would be on a yacht every weekend.
Would be on the yacht. All right.
But it's low hanging fruit, man. And like I said before, the thing for me in doing this, was about a different type of freedom where I wanted a level of obviously financial security. But not to the point where I'm gonna, because then all of a sudden I'll be back in the same position, right? Like I'll be back where I was at the schools, not loving what I'm doing, frustrated that I'm conforming to a system to make a buck. Like that's not my thing. What you do there, you're sacrificing the science at that point, whether you're meaning to or not, you are. So, but yeah, I
took you way off track. I'm sorry. We were talking about, so if
you're good,
we want to kind of get back to how you,
So when one of those
elite athlete coaching.
yeah, when I do take someone and they come in, obviously I'm not necessarily concerned with destructive behaviors or challenging behaviors, so long as they don't have self-destructive behaviors. Like there can be guys like athletes who, and I probably wouldn't take these guys, but who have off-field issues and challenges that get in the way of their talent and so on. I've been very fortunate not to really experience that. But the first thing is understanding what level they're at. Right? Are you an elite high school level player who's looking to go, who has some D1 offers and is going to play D1? My first question to that athlete is, what have the coaches at the college you're going to, what have they told you they want to see from you when you get to camp? So for example, the first athlete I ever worked with is Lucas Niang. That was 6 years ago. Lucas Niang, for those who don't know, is now the starting right tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll get to him because he's a huge test case for this entire thing from last year. But 6 years ago, when he was a high school player, he had committed to TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. They're a D1 school in the Big 12 conference. And the first thing I asked him is, so what did TCU tell you they're hoping to see when you show up on campus as a freshman? Because look, and I believe you're from the Northeast, Matt. So there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of Northeast football players who go on to these big Southern Conference schools and dominate, right? So I naturally assumed he was going to have an uphill climb from the other players they recruited. So my focus was get really good at the things they want you to do. So when you get there as a freshman, you're already impressing them. And now the rest of it becomes a bit more simple for you. And so he explained to me that the coach wanted to see this type of footwork, this type of hand placement, this type of set. You know, he's an offensive lineman, by the way. I think I mentioned that. And so the first thing I did is I looked for where there were deficiencies from my understanding of football. And at this point in my career, I had already studied from pro football coaches like Paul Pasqualoni, who's a Northeasterner, Connecticut guy. Tony Sperano, who used to be the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and his Dave Paganetti, another Connecticut guy. So I knew a lot of these different things. And so I started looking at Lucas, where are your movement deficiencies? So they want you to be a good, not to get heavy in jargon here, but they want you to be a good vertical setter as a right tackle. Where is that a problem for you? And the first thing I saw is the second the ball was snapped, rather than get back into his set, he would stand straight up vertically, right? And so then I had to shape that out. How do we shape that out? There's different things you can do. I did a physical boundary sort of thing, like a physical version of tag teaching, if you will, for those of you familiar with tag teaching, among other different things. And then we just kept working from there. And every year, there would be different demands the coaches put on him, right? And we need to see you get better at this. So that's what we would work when we were together. We need to see you get better at this. That's what we'd work when we were together. He went on to never give up a sack as a college athlete, got drafted in the 3rd round by the Kansas City Chiefs. He opted out of his rookie season last year because of COVID. So for those of you who follow the NFL, you know that last year during the early years of the pandemic, the NFL allowed all players to opt out for the season and not lose a year from their contract. They wouldn't get paid, but their contract would basically be put on pause. And he was one of the only rookies to opt out, probably because he lived in the New York, Connecticut area. And, those of us who lived here, we were the epicenter of the pandemic in the early times. So we understood its seriousness. And so he was probably less risk averse than maybe some others. And so he spent the entire year off last year with me, exclusively. We worked 5 days a week. We tried to mirror the Kansas City Chiefs practice schedule. He had some assignments from the Chiefs coaching staff that they wanted him to work on, and we worked on those things. He went back this year, and he's the starting right tackle. So guys, never played an NFL snap, took an entire year off, worked with me, goes back to the Chiefs, and is now the starting right tackle for a team that has been in the Super Bowl the last 2 years. And so for me, what's been a consistent goal through that entire thing? What do your coaches want to see from you? Let's work on that. I'm not a guru. I am not going to say, join my training program. It will make you the best tackle ever, because I don't get to determine your playing time, right? Your coaches do. So you might as well make them happy. Not worry about making me happy. So he's an example. Ben Managu of the Indianapolis Colts is another example. Max Crosby of the Raiders is another example. But they all follow that same process. What are the behaviors that your coaches want to see from you on the field in terms of your technique and for your position? And how can we strengthen those? How can we shape out deficiencies? How can we make you a quicker, faster, more efficient performer in those areas?
The parallels to contemporary ABA services are just kind of like jumping out at me here in terms of in the individualization of these interventions. And, that's the thing that I think is really apparent. So sounds just simply amazing. I want to get in. I know you spent some time on the controversial exchange talking about the standard acceleration chart and how you use that to analyze sports performance. And I don't know if this is a good segue to talk about the Pro Football Network and how you. Let's do that first. Let's talk about what is the Pro Football. Or I want to give you an opportunity if you want to wrap up anything about the behavior movement. I want to give you the opportunity to do that. But I know we have limited time left, and I definitely want to talk about this really cool endeavor you've got going, the Pro Football Network. So,
yeah, I mean, it all actually ties together pretty much. So they're not so separate. I mean, the behavior movement, the way to think of it is it's the direct on the field physical training and service provider. And then Pro Football Network is a football media company that the behavior movement does a little bit of work for. And then I do a ton of work for the Pro Football Network beyond the behavior movement. But there is certainly some crossover.
Okay.
But yeah, and actually just getting onto the SCC, the standard acceleration chart, the focus for that came from what I was doing for the behavior movement. And then it was actually one of the first things I felt I could provide to Pro Football Network, which I'm now a co-owner of. But it started with me tracking I track, first of all, everyone, not just the athletes, but also the individuals with developmental disabilities. I track all, my graphing and my data collection is all for the standard acceleration chart. I don't do linear graphing when I'm taking data and analyzing the data for programmatic purposes. It's all standard acceleration charting. But for the athletes, what I would do is I would be able to track how quickly they were getting better, right? In simplest terms. I think I know the SEC is always hard to explain for a lot of people. And actually, Ryan O does a really good explainer on it on his YouTube channel. I think he has Amy on there, Amy Evans on there to break it down and other precision teaching stuff. But yeah, it's so I started doing that. And then out of that, the other thing I started doing was finding out that I could be semi-predictive, which is a lot of actually what goes into standard acceleration charting is you're starting to look ahead at where you're headed. But then anyone who is an NFL fan, who plays fantasy football, who does sports betting, which are the two fastest growing areas inside of football content, the ability to be predictive is actually like super valuable. And so from there birthed a whole range of sports analytics that are based in ABA and behavior science, that, led to the creation of something called the offensive value metric, which is the ability to use ABA to determine a player's actual value beyond the box score to their team, right? So not getting too deep in the weeds here, but box score stats are usually multiplayer stats. If Tom Brady, and I keep going back to him because I know you're a New Englandy guy, but Tom Brady, right? His whole career was, now I'm going to make you mad, but his whole career was based on throwing like 5 and 6 yard passes that his receivers would turn into 30-yard gains. And so what I tried to do was tease out who really gets credited with the value on those plays, right? Because once the ball leaves Brady's hand, the quarterback's hand, he no longer has control over it. What happens with it after that, right? So he controls the distance that ball travels in the air and where it gets caught. From that point forward, the rest of it gets credited to the pass catcher, the receiver, or the tight end.
So the running yards after the catch.
That's right. And so what I do is I actually don't use box score stats. I only use information and metrics that involve only the individual player. So for quarterbacks, that's things like air yards. That's things like aggression, right? So how often are they throwing into tight windows? For receivers, it's things like separation, because only the receiver can control how far they get away from the defensive back to make it an easier throw for the quarterback. And from there, we're able to tease out relative value, right? So this receiver, while his box score stats are not through the roof, there's a reason he's 7 years in the league without being a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro. It's because he does these behaviors really, really well and makes himself very valuable to the team. So doing all of that is where the behavior movement crosses over into Pro Football Network. And it all starts with standard acceleration charting and the ability to be able to see in advance where players are kind of headed based on trends, acceleration, deceleration, and those things. But Pro Football Network in general is now, at this point, 2.5 years later from when I got involved as a co-owner, is now a mid-major, what we call a mid-major media company. We have a website, profootballnetwork.com, where we put out like 140 articles a week that range all across the NFL. So things from just your straight news and analysis to fantasy football, to sports betting, to analytics. And all the analytics, by the way, for your listeners, are exclusively the behavior movement analytics, which are ABA in nature, ABA based and behavior science based. So we don't do things like any type of subjective analysis in the analytics realm. It's all things that we do here. And also a lot of that too, by the way, is for your listeners who have heard of the company Pro Football Focus, which is like the big famous sports analytics company in the NFL. What I know is the players and agents hate Pro Football Focus. The teams don't use it. The coaches don't use it. It doesn't have any value to them. It's all BS, subjective BS. The players hate it. And so we're trying to offer an alternative to that with what we do. And so, stay tuned, because behavior science might be making its way into the NFL more than it already has discreetly. So go to profootballnetwork.com. We also have a YouTube channel, and Ryan O, by the way, is my main guy over at Pro Football Network. I was able to convince him to join me over there and to start doing some behavior-based practices around video and audio and understanding audience consumption behavior and how we can grow our presence and grow our brand and meet the current needs of football media consumers who are tired of the outrage culture, the fake sensationalism, the hot takes, who just want to have conversations about their favorite sport and their favorite teams. And that's what we're trying to offer. And so Ryan and I work very closely day by day together. In fact, the second I'm done with this pod, I got to give him a call, because we got some stuff coming up, some new content that we're creating together. But yeah, so that's that.
That sounds awesome. And this conversation is timely because obviously the football season is just around the corner. So we've gotten through preseason. And I think if time permits, I want to do a little patrons only kind of, get some of your hot takes on some specific players and teams and whatnot.
I'm good, man. You right. Go wherever you want to go. We got all the time.
All right. But before that, as I promised, let's get to the elephant in the room.
Sure. Let's
talk about certification, the lack thereof, and so forth. So we kind of teased that earlier on in the conversation. What are your thoughts on the necessity of board certification as it relates to this line of work, or maybe just your thoughts on in general, or what your experience have been in the field?
Yeah. So let me start this, because this is also very prescient, because part of what I do with the behavior movement, not only do my clients come to me privately, but I do also work as a contractor for school districts who, let's say their students get 8 to 10 hours a week of behavior support services. I sometimes for students take up 2 or 3 of those hours a week officially through my partnership with a board certified behavior analyst. And the reason I bring that up is I want to be very clear. I do think there needs to be a governing body that ensures that the people practicing behavior analysis where they're making impacts in people's lives are doing it ethically, morally, responsibly, and correctly. I also want to be very clear that the BACB is not that body. And just full transparency, full disclosure, I did all the coursework, completed the coursework at FIT. 4.0 GPA. Happy to share transcripts for those who want to see it. Have done that because people have tried to call my bluff on this.
Really?
So yes. So happy to do that.
No kidding.
It's not a competency issue. It's, again, it goes back to I don't enjoy being put in a box. And I don't want to, there's a lot of, and this is my opinion now, guys. Okay. So to be very clear, it's okay if not all of you share this opinion. Your experiences may have been different, and that's totally fine. But I believe the science of ABA is beautiful because it's so science. It's so scientific. And the moment the board stopped advocating for it as a scientific field and began allowing it to be seen simply as a therapeutic method is when a lot of issues, I believe, started. I believe it started for the field in general. I believe it allowed the rise of some of these far left or far right movements, like the neurodiversity movement, which believes that ABA is a form of abuse and torture. And there's been no pushback or advocacy from the board on that. On the other side, the board also has no imagination. And again, when I talk about treating it like a science, science is meant to be pushed to the boundaries. How far can you push it? How far can you take it? Where can you take it? And experience failure, by the way, in taking it there, and then realize, okay, it's not the right application. We got to dial it back. But the board does not push for that, advocate for that. The exam is almost exclusively autism based. A little bit of OBM sprinkled in. And how do I know that? Took the exam and passed. Okay. So again, it's not about, I just don't want to be certified with the board because of those reasons. And I'm always happy to talk with people from the board and how I think they can make some improvements and be a bit more inclusive, encourage more inclusion in the field through entrepreneurship, through sports and fitness applications. I know ABAI has that subgroup that they do. By the way, spoke on a panel for ABAI as a health, sports and fitness representative in the field. And so one of the things they asked me is like, how do you foresee this going in the future? And my question is always like, is the board, and once the board finally catches on that this is a wonderful sub application of ABA science, are they going to remember those of us who broke ground in it first? Or is it going to become, again, more boxed, super strict boundaries around how it's done, and kind of, go from there? So,
all right. Let me interject here, Fida.
Please do. Please do.
I have, I've had many guests, and I've got many listeners who are, heavily involved in the board, at all the levels and whatnot. And I'm probably going to admit my bias here. I've been board certified since 2002. I took the test on paper and pencil. I think I'm like the 870th or 770th or whatever board certified behavior analyst. So, I don't want to. So when you're saying these things, I'm like getting like kind of squirming in my seat here a little bit.
I'm sorry, man.
It's like
it's not personal.
No. I know. I'm saying this in terms of just trying to put my bias, forward here as I'm, sure. And so, sometimes I wonder, when people criticize the board, are they really criticizing the professional bodies like ABAI, or perhaps some of the other things that might be, I think there's some confusion that exists, and I don't think I'm the right one to dispel that confusion. But in terms of what what the function of the board is versus an ABAI versus an APBA, et cetera. I think sometimes people have an idea of what the BACB can do that is perhaps beyond their purview or beyond their charter or mandate or what have you. So, all that to say is that I'm not saying that your criticisms are unfair, certainly, but I think some of those probably can be directed at some other or additional bodies of organizations or in the field as well.
Yeah, let me be clear too about that, because I think that's a good point that I don't do a good enough job of articulating. Right, I took a very singular, narrow focus at one body in particular because we're specifically talking about certification. But my criticism on the broader scale of messaging, keeping it scientific, it goes beyond any one body. The fact that, in my opinion, what I've seen, and I'm not obviously talking about guys like yourself. Like you're the first, by the way, Behavioral Observations is the first podcast I ever found and listened to in the ABA field before I really was in it the way I'm in it now. And it's a huge reason of why I wanted to continue doing things I listened to on your podcast. Same thing with Ryan O. And it's completely genuine. But I'm restless, man. Yeah. I want to see things get to a place where we go beyond, like for example, where do I see some criticisms with the board? I think too many people are getting certified who shouldn't be getting certified. Mm-hmm. And just peruse the and this is going to sound silly, but just peruse the ABA Facebook group. And BCBA is asking really rudimentary questions that are
that's completely fair and legitimate. Yeah.
And then look, my experience working in public schools, working alongside some other BCBAs who they got their BCBA because it's a nice reflection on their resume, but they're doing like superstitious OT work, but they get to call themselves a BCBA. And that's where I think there's been a bit of a degradation in the field that I would like to see and communicate and maybe work with individuals on the board to figure out a different way. Like and the only other thing I'll say about certification is this. And whether you're certified through the BACB or there's a number of other, and I'm not certified by anybody, by the way, it's not targeted at anyone in particular, but a lot of it again is there are things that there's a bit of censorship sometimes too. When you do push the boundaries of the science and you do push it to places where it hasn't been before, gone before, that and honestly, there's also a bit of and I think we're seeing this culturally everywhere, but there's a lot of social activism that has permeated the board that sometimes has taken it also beyond scientific stuff, and now it's about making everybody feel good. And believe me, follow me on my social media accounts. I'm not a far right winger, whatever. But there is a limit, and when you're talking about science, that's what has to matter, right? The data. What is the data telling you? And I just think there's just a lot of these different things, and I don't want it to be a bash session. I want it to actually be a constructive conversation. I want to have these conversations with the people who make these decisions.
Yeah, I think I would point listeners to two resources here for some additional interesting conversation. I think that there's a excellent article in the Behavior Analyst, now unfortunately renamed Perspectives on Behavior Science. I really don't prefer that title of the I love the old Behavior Analyst, but anyway, it's way back from it's almost a decade. I think it's called Don't Wag the Dog. It's by Norman and Cohn, and I need to nudge Matt to update this article, because I think it was but I think it's something like Don't Wag the Dog: How to Move ABA Services Beyond the ASD DD World. I don't know if you ever caught that article, but it's really interesting to talk about how ABA can be used in places like, a lot of stuff that you're doing in terms of the wellness, fitness, sports performance world, even branching out into other allied health professions, even like OT and things along those lines. But they all require some sort of, they all require, kind of jumping out into the void, if you will. Like what you had to do, there was no job you could apply for.
Right.
There was
Exactly.
no, in the days of monster.com, there was no, submit your online application here. You had to create your career path. And so I think anyone who's going to be doing anything outside of the, I guess, the DD world, is going to have to endeavor some risk, if you will, and be prepared to kind of figure things out on their own. So, So another example is I don't know if you caught this or not, but I've had Kim Behrens on the show a few times from Fit Learning, and she does not shy away from sharing her views.
That's correct.
But I think it's the second one I had when I did this was an interview we taped at a conference that we were both attending, and she spoke at length about how the board, how she let her certification lapse, and she, like me, has been in the field for over 20 years, and I don't want to give it away here, but if you haven't caught that one, and I'm not just speaking to you, Brett, but just the audience more generally, that might be worth going back and giving it a listen. I'll put a link to that one in the show notes. But she has some of the same concerns. So they're out doing their own thing in terms of the Fit Learning. I don't know if you followed some of the stuff that the Fit Learning folks are doing.
I do, for sure, and everyone should if you're listening. It's look, and if I could just say one more thing before we wrap this part of it up. I'm not immune to, like I said at the very outset of this conversation, I'm not immune to the idea that we need to make sure people are responsibly doing this, are responsible scientists. But what's happening is we're not advocating for scientists anymore. And what I would say is, and maybe this is too simplistic, utopic, whatever. Skinner wasn't a board certified behavior analyst because it didn't exist. Because he pushed us in this direction. And again, I'm not trying to be, nostalgic for the days of Skinner. That's not what this is about. But because he's doing and he did what we, you mentioned Kim, myself, others are doing, which is going where it hasn't gone before and figuring out what we can do there, and understanding that it was a science for human behavior, not autistic behavior, not Down syndrome, that they're humans. They're enveloped into the larger umbrella of human behavior. And remember, behavior is defined. Everything a living thing does, not even just humans.
Sure.
A living thing, right? And which means there's just a whole, I mean, we say there's some areas where ABA can go into. I'm not convinced it can't be observed everywhere. And the last thing I'll say is not to draw on Walden 2 and the creation of utopia and all this stuff, but the most important thing was making a societal impact, right, on the people that you're trying to work with in regards to their behavior, right? And we look at the world around us. We can argue that social media is a huge inflection point for the way we treat each other, the way our discourse has been led. We can argue the general media, and again, going back to Pro Football Network, trying to rein in the sensationalism, the outrage culture, the hot takes, and that permeates all media. Ryan O and I are convinced we can make a difference using ABA to get back to meaningful, insightful conversation instead of two people yelling their opinions at each other with no interest in listening.
Yeah.
That's somewhere ABA can go to. But you sit for the board exam and you get your certification. None of that is on the exam. None of that is in your coursework. None of what I do with the behavior movement is on the exam or in your coursework. And so for me, it just never made sense to be certified by a body that didn't even conceive what it is that I wanted to do with the science to begin with. And that's really what it boils down to in its simplest form. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And and more generally with the work that you're doing and with in media, I certainly appreciate your elevating the discourse out there beyond some, like as you said, the hot takes and the screaming and whatnot. So that's very much needed. So as we're kind of wrapping up the I guess the what I might call the public segment of this episode, what advice, Brett, would you have for the newly minted BCBA? So or newly minted person, however they decide to whether they're certified or not. Someone who's interested, someone who has some level of education in the field. So I'll slightly modify the question here that I usually.
I'll tell you what. I would target this though to the newly minted BCBA, because I think more often than not, maybe their experience may inadvertently inhibit some of that exploration and entrepreneurial spirit. And my advice would be, don't allow that to happen. Don't lose your curiosity and don't lose your desire to continue exploring. Don't scour the Facebook groups or the social media groups or the discussion groups because you have a particular student or issue that you need help with, and then you go and ask for an already made program to fix that. That's not how the science is supposed to work, right? It's not about flipping through your book of already established programs and picking one and trying it like it's a menu at a restaurant. Continue to be explorative and curious and trial and error and be scientific. And understand that you have a child, or if you're in the DD field, and then that's where you want to be, and that's fine. There's a need for good behavior analysts in that field. Let's not sugarcoat that.
Yeah, it's a yes and, not a yeah but.
Yeah, yes and, yeah, absolutely. And so make sure that you're willing to commit the time necessary to make a truly impactful difference, not find the quickest solution. And then beyond that, explore, push it beyond DD, push it beyond ASD, come join me in this media crusade. Come join me in health and fitness and wellness. And that's by the way, that's a DD field. That's still DD and ASD. It's just not in the classroom. And I just really, that would be my thing, man, is science is about exploration. It's about failure. It's about success. And it's probably why I love sports so much, because sports in so many ways is about failure. The best baseball players only get a hit 30% of the time.
Right.
I mean, a quarterback in a game might throw 50 passes. Maybe only 2 of them score points. And so it's the ability to learn from that failure. But if we're no longer willing to accept the idea of failure and we're looking for quick hit solutions, we've lost. And so my advice is just continue to explore and push your own limits and boundaries within the field. Adhere to your principles, ABA Tech G. Don't lose sight of those. That's got to be your guiding light. But there's so much you can do with them. And so just push that out.
All right. So let's transition into some talk about the upcoming NFL season. So let's do some quick hits here. I reached out both on Patreon and within my own household. So I got a couple questions here for you, Brett, about some NFL questions. So the first one is, so for some reason I never quite understood my youngest.
Okay, that's just a little bit of the introduction to the patrons only content of this particular episode. We went on probably for another at least 25 minutes or so talking about the upcoming NFL season. If you'd like to support the show, if you'd like to get bonus content like this, discounts on FTF and behavioral observations, CEU events, and other goodies, go to patreon.com/behavioral observations and check it out there and see if there is a patron tier that is right for you. And so I think that's it for this episode. So until session 166, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.